Hey everybody, before I get started, I just want to mention a couple of ways that you can engage with me on a more personal level. I have a few avenues set up and I keep focusing on one, and I figured why don't I make a short little video talking about all of them real quick before we get into these episodes. So first thing, Patreon. There's a link in the episode description, in every episode description to the Patreon, as well as a video on the feed called Major Announcement that has all the details of what each tier offers and how much they cost. I implore you to check that out. I offer a lot of cool shit for my patrons. Second thing, the Discord channel. There's also a Discord link in the episode description and in every episode description. I have multiple channels set up there for each show that I'm covering, and it's a great way to just engage with me. I have a channel set up for MMA talk as well. I'm a big MMA fan, so if you're an MMA fan, you can check that out as well. There's a link to the Discord in the episode description. And then lastly, the Facebook and Twitter. Social media. Follow me on there. I post news on there. When I say news, I mean like, hey, I'm stopping covering this show. Hey, I'm starting covering this show. Let me know what you think about this. I do live watches of things on Facebook where like I'll check in and say I'm watching so-and-so show, and then I'll like live comment while I'm watching it, and that'll be cool if maybe you watch that show too and you want to watch along with me, or you're watching it later and you will see my thoughts, which are usually pretty entertaining because I'm usually pretty high when I'm writing them. So check out all those links in each episode description, and let's talk about this episode. Peace.
One mic, one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. One mic. One mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 2, Episode 3 of Paramount Plus's Mayor of Kingstown, entitled 5 at 5. The title refers to a scene we end up seeing in the prison at the end of the episode, not to a top 5 countdown on a radio station, but the guards essentially turn their backs at 5 o'clock, and the inmates essentially handle their business to violently choose. I don't want to say violently choose the leaders within the prison, but I think it's more for the leaders to assert their own dominance over the other prisoners. People even come after Bunny in this scene, but he ends up getting some help, and he ends up getting the upper hand over, I think that was the leader of the Bloods that he ends up talking to. He comes up saying, like, are we going to be brothers today? And the dude's like, nope. But it might have been one of his guys. I don't know. They run a lot of faces across the screen when it comes to the gangs and whatnot. But Bunny ultimately ends up giving Mike an ultimatum, saying he's got 48 hours to get him out of the prison, or he's going to bring some of this heat to his doorstep. Not the cops, not cops on the outside, not guards on the inside. It's going to be close to Mike. So that's what the title refers to. And I think this episode was definitely something more of a setup episode. Not a lot happened here, but I do want to talk about what it did set up. I don't want to say the little bit that it did set up. It set up a lot, but not a lot happened in order to set that up, but it set up a lot. Plus, I have some, I think, pretty interesting theories slash predictions. Well, actually, it's just one grand unifying theory slash prediction, but multiple things happen in this episode that kind of feed into it. But before we get into my predictions for the future, let's talk about the present. So the episode opens with a raid that's done at Bunny's grandmother's house, and when Mike confronts Ian about this raid, it's the first of a couple conversations where I think that one side makes all of the good points and the other side is very clearly in the wrong. Mike makes the point that Bunny is essentially trying to help them on the inside. So like, why would you fuck with his family? And Ian's like, oh, well, we got a tip about drugs and da. Which, side note, I wonder if they legitimately got a tip from a CO or if, not CO, I'm sorry, what's a CI, or maybe it still might have been a tip from a CI, but I'm wondering if this individual was somebody who gave this tip because they knew it would fuck with Bunny. Because like, oh yeah, this address, this happens. And they knew that it would be something that Bunny might be a little bit more susceptible to because he's in the inside and can't necessarily fight back easy. So I'm wondering if it was like a legitimate tip or even a mistake tip, but a tip that was meant for the right purposes, essentially. Or if it was somebody who explicitly was trying to take advantage of the fact that Bunny was locked up. But Ian says they got a tip there was drugs and shit in there. And Ian makes the point of like, hey, what do you want me to do? You want me to stop doing my job? But like, I agree with Mike here. Like, there's always going to be drug activity there. And Bunny is on the inside, is in prison, helping you out. You get a tip on Bunny's grandma's crib. You either need to overlook it or you need to go in there way more low key with like a couple of guys, just uniforms, normal knock on the door type thing, not going in there like a full raid. But I like what it's setting up though, because this is just another point, I think, like a bullet point, if you want to run down this list of the reasons why Bunny is justified in being mad at Mike. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm going to say that my prediction revolves around Bunny. If my prediction comes true, I'm not sitting here saying that Bunny's actions will be justified in that whatever action he takes, especially if it's my prediction, that he's justified in taking that action. But I am making the case that he's justified in acting. And I think this is one of those, the first example of that is that Mike was not able to stop this raid on his grandmother's house, and that he didn't even know about it until after the fact. Another point too about this situation. Not only is this the first sign of Mike not necessarily being able to hold up his end of his bargain with Bunny, but keep in mind that this agreement with Bunny, that Bunny agreed to this without even knowing the full details of it. Like he put a colossal amount of trust into Mike. Mike put him in the absolute worst situation, convinced Bunny to agree to that prior to putting him in that situation. And Bunny's side of this involves way more risk. So it's like he really has really screwed Bunny. And the fact that he's screwing Bunny is, I think, overshadowed by, not overshadowed, but just regular shadow. Just it's covered up by the fact that Bunny was so willing to do it because Bunny trusts Mike that much. And I think that piece of it, the fact that Bunny was willing to sacrifice what he did because of his trust for Mike, I think that's going to play a big part too in Bunny's justification for why Bunny's going to do what I think he might do within the next couple of episodes. So meanwhile, we learned that Kyle has been suspended without pay for that incident we saw last week with his partner pulling over that guy who was towing the boat, and then the family shoots the guy, and then Kyle shoots them, and then he finds out there's a kid in the back. We find out Kyle was suspended for that. I made the whole suspended without pay. And Kyle tells Ian that he quit his job because of that. And, I mentioned last week, the whole thing about Kyle being super traumatized and whatnot. Kyle shows up at the KPD, and you could tell he's like having like happy memories. Like he's in there looking around like, oh, it's so nice to be back with all my friends. And Ian tells him it's got to be decided that his shooting was justified, essentially, before he can give him a job. Because that's why Kyle's here. He's essentially asking for a job. But he says Kyle doesn't have that kind of time. He says that could take months. So what he ultimately ends up doing is that he asks Mike for work. Mike essentially gives him the job of finding Iris, but really, they say it without saying it. They don't say it directly, but it's something like, Kyle says something like, because if Iris is still here, that means... And he doesn't finish. And the implication here is that he really wants to find Iris, because if he assumes that Iris is gone, I mean, I guess if Iris is actually gone, that's great. But if he assumes Iris is gone and she's not, then that means that if she's still here being Kingstown or whatever, then that means that Milo is still there. And that's the real concern, is Milo. But this is what I wanted to talk about, where I talk about the show not caring about things that I think are important. And I think, I mentioned this in the episode description. I think it's pretty wild how the show has completely turned a blind eye to Kyle's partner. Like, I don't even know if that guy is alive or not. Maybe, and it could be something I missed toward the end of the second episode, but it's really not that important to my point. But I don't even know if that guy's alive or not. I don't know why this family of three would have opened fire on a police officer on a routine traffic stop. Like, they just had the writers just had a family kill a cop just to advance Kyle's traumatic storyline with no explanation of why this family would do that or with what happened to the cop. It's like, okay, the detail to them with this, the important thing is we need to pile on Kyle's trauma and put him in a situation that's so bad that he's forced to go ask Mike for help. How do we get there? And somebody in the room was like, we just put him there. Who gives a fuck how we get there? And so they said, like, they're not going to be concerned with why this cop got shot. What happened to this cop afterward? None of that's important. Just we need this stuff to happen, so we're just going to make it happen. And, a better show doesn't glaze over what I consider to be, anyway, important details just to advance the story. They fill in those details because those details matter. And I think that's the sign of a true prestige television show, is that they don't skirt over those details or glance over those details. They fill those details in. And this show just kind of feels like those details don't fucking matter. And there's a couple more instances of this that I'm gonna get to. And because I'm not saying this show doesn't care about those details just based off this one scene. I'm saying it based off a couple, but I'll get to those. But another interesting note here, and I think I'll let this segue into my big theory that I've been alluding to here, is the point that Kyle is at right now, and with his character, the point that Kyle's character is at. So Kyle was like completely isolated from Mike's shit in season 1, right? He was an actual cop, so he couldn't be involved in any of Mike and I forget Kyle Chandler's character's name for obvious reasons, but he couldn't be involved in Mike and Kyle Chandler's characters shit, getting his hands dirty and all that, because he's an actual cop. His mother's warning him, like, don't fuck with Mike, like he's problem Mike and the brother whose name I can't remember, all that, and Kyle didn't want any business with it. So now here we are, season 2, episode 3, not even far into season 2, and Kyle's at the point of having to ask Mike for work. So fucking around with Mike, he's been caught in the middle of a prison riot, which led to him no longer having that job and ending up at the other job, where he ultimately ends up in the situation with the shooting, with the towing of the boat and the family and all that shit. Ends up in that shooting, which leads them getting suspended, which leads them having to quit. Well, not having to quit, choosing to quit, which ultimately leads to him now working for Mike. And it's like he's now in a situation that he would have completely avoided otherwise, which is working for Mike. And he's now forced to work for Mike. Really, if you want to look at it, because of situations that Mike has created and put him into, he's now forced to work for Mike. Now, on the other hand, we have Bunny, and I already talked about what Bunny, I keep saying we, I'm the only one talking, but I feel like we're having a conversation here. It's all of us. We've talked about what Bunny has sacrificed for Mike's plan and how it's looking more and more unlikely that Mike is going to be able to hold up his end of the bargain. And in this episode, we introduced this Warwick Detention Center or whatever. And I think it's also like a group who owns prisons or something like that. But this place that they tour these prisoners have no freedom. They don't have anything, no yard, no cafeteria, nothing. It seems like they're just locked up 24/7. But they don't have any worries in the prison. Like Kareem's looking at them like, how do you treat people like this? And then Mike's like, oh, they're walking around like it's safari. And I'm kind of looking at it like, looks safe to me. But I mean, yeah, I guess if you want to treat people humanely, but at the same time, if you want to treat, like, okay, well, we want to treat people humanely, let's give them yard and let's give them a cafeteria and let's give them some freedom. And they start killing each other and shit. Like, they get the fuck back in the cell then. Like, why would I give you freedom? But so I'm looking at it like, okay, they riot, and now you got the people in this prison. These people locked up. They ain't rioting, so I mean, it looks like it works. But whatever. I'm not into inhumane prison conditions. But I'm also not opposed to isolation, because that's just how I am. So I look at it like, that don't look so bad. It looks safe and you get to be alone. Sounds like an easy run to me. But the woman who is leading Kareem, Evelyn, and Mike on this tour talks about how this group is essentially going to take in the people from their tent city prison that they have everybody set up in the yard in the tents. That those people are going to be moved to other places. They're going to be moved to, she mentions a place by name, and then she says the place that they're in at that moment, and then they have other prisons in other states and whatnot. So this seems to be, I think, setting up Bunny getting transferred to this Warwick place before Mike can get him out in this little 48-hour window that Bunny gave him. And now Bunny's legit locked up in a place where Mike has no power and no influence and no ability to protect him. And Bunny promised essentially vengeance is going to hit close to home for Mike if he doesn't hold up his end of the deal. And also, by the way, this conversation is the second conversation of 2, where I mentioned earlier. The first was Mike's good points to Ian about not fucking with Bunny's grandparents. Everything Bunny says to Mike in this conversation is the second example. Bunny is right as rain. He sacrificed everything. Mike's not holding up his end of the deal. Now, Bunny says that vengeance is going to hit close to home if he can't get him out. Now, I'm saying that Bunny's likely going to end up transferred to this other prison. Now, what member of Mike's family is now in a shit situation that they're in a position where they have to ask Mike for help when they previously would have ever had anything to do with Mike's business? Kyle. And wouldn't it be, I don't want to say poetic because that makes it sound like a good thing, but wouldn't it be, I guess, a good or an interesting turn of events for this story if Mike's inability to hold up his end of his deal with Bunny ends up getting his brother killed when his brother never wanted anything to do with his business in the first place, and the only reason his brother is even there to be involved in this business is because of situations that Mike put him in. Like, that's a lot of guilt right there. Like, I made this deal to Bunny. I fucked Bunny because I made this deal to him. He made this huge sacrifice, and now he's in a worse situation, and I can't help him. So I fucked Bunny, and now because of that, because I made a promise that I couldn't keep, now my brother is dead, and my brother's only dead because he's only here because of situations that I had a part in putting him in. And I think that is like a great place to put where now Mike is carrying a massive amount of guilt. I feel like that's going to be like the end of episode 5, and then the second half of the season is going to be dealing with that. Like Mike dealing with the guilt of that, Mike and Bunny dealing with what is now probably would be a situation that they can't come back from. Like, they're enemies now. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. Like, we ain't cool no more. Like, so, like, I think that could be where this is going. That's a pretty big theory to think that Bunny's gonna have Kyle killed in the end, like two episodes from now. But I feel like this also doesn't have 7 episodes of story left unless you kind of have like almost like a mid-season finale kind of. Like after episode 5, that happens and you have something of a mid-season finale. You don't have to go on a break, but it could feel like a mid-season finale, and then the final 5 episodes deal with that, deal with the fallout of whatever's happening with Milo, whether, he's probably going to make some sort of big move or something like that. So I think that's kind of like a dual theory. Like, I gave my big theory what I think is going to happen, and then my second kind of like minor theory is that it's going to be almost like an episode 5 mid-season finale, and the second half of the season is going to play up essentially not an entirely different storyline, but it's going to be like, this is going to be a mini season, these 5 episodes, and then the second 5 are going to be a mini separate season. So now I want to wrap up with the Iris storyline, because this, like the story with Kyle, and I was saying the show not caring about what happened to his partner and all in the family and whatnot, this is the second instance of the show, I think, overlooking important details this week, and the third overall of the show overlooking important details this season. So Mike visits that Russian guy Joseph, who works for Milo, a couple of times in this episode. And in one of those instances, Mike hears a baby and sees a woman leaving with that baby. We later learn that woman's name is Tatiana, and Tatiana later finds Mike and tells him that she'll leave the door unlocked for him at the club if he wants to come and save Iris. And when Mike gets there, he's apprehended by Joseph. Now, here's my issue. How did Tatiana find Mike? Prior to their conversation, and I rewound to make sure, prior to the conversation that Mike and Tatiana have together, the last time we saw Tatiana, she was talking to Iris, kind of like laying down the game, like, this is what it's going to be like now, and playing dumb with whether or not Milo was alive, and then was like, okay, yeah, you can see him if he calls for you, whatever. That's the last time we saw Tatiana before that conversation. The last time we saw Mike, he was at that Warwick Detention Center. So where were they at for that conversation? Like, where did Mike go? How did Tatiana know where to find Mike if I didn't even know where Mike was? It was just like, okay, last time he's at the prison, and now he's just in this place, this parking lot or whatever. And even if it's, the only thing I can do is assume that maybe he was back at his office, and that Tatiana wouldn't know where his office is, so she just showed up. But again, these are like the kind of details I'm having to piece that together. I'm gonna have to assume that. But like, the idea that this woman whose face we didn't even see until this episode, how she just pops up with Mike in some random undisclosed location, like, that kind of bothered me. And again, I think, I can infer that he was at his office and that she would know where his office is because maybe Joseph told her that. But I have to think like, okay, how, after I get over my initial shock of where the fuck are they at and how is this conversation happening, how would she know how to find him, how, like, any of that. After I get past my initial shock of that, I then have to go, how can this be possible? And then I have to fashion up an explanation. I shouldn't have to do that. I feel like the explanation should be fairly clear. Like, even a little thing like Joseph whispering in Tatiana's ear and then she leaves. Now she shows up, I could be like, okay, well, Joseph maybe must have told her where to find Mike or something like that. Or maybe just a wider shot showing Mike arriving at his office. Now I know, okay, well, Mike's at his office. Joseph probably told her, hey, go find this Mike guy, trick him into coming here. This is where his office is, hang out there. I can infer all of that if you just have Joseph whispering something in Tatiana's ear and then she leaves. And then as Mike pulls up, maybe like an establishing shot showing me that he's pulling up to his office. But as it stood, it's just like a picture of Mike. Like, he's just like getting out of his car. She emerges from like behind a dumpster or some shit. Like, what the fuck? What the fuck? And, oh boy. Mike visits this Russian guy, Joseph. Actually, hold on. Let me move forward a little bit. So this reminds me of Tony Gilroy talking about the hardest part of writing Andor being getting two characters in the same location if you need them to have a scene together. Like, how do you get them to know where each other's location is? How do they, just the dynamics of getting two characters who otherwise are in two different locations that wouldn't know about each other's location, and you want them to have a scene together. How do you do that? He said, like, that's one of the hardest parts of writing. This show clearly didn't give a fuck about that. Like, they wanted these two characters to have a conversation, so they did it, and they didn't worry about how they got there or explaining that little piece of it to me. And I know to them that probably doesn't matter, but that matters to me. Those little things, and those are the things that when I look at something like Andor and I think about, because Tony Gilroy in this podcast I listened to, he gave an example of him doing this. I look at that scene in Andor and I look at this scene in this show, and I don't think that this show is shitty because it didn't put forth the effort that Andor did, but I look at it as this show can never be what Andor is because it doesn't care as much about those kinds of details as Andor did. And that's, I think, a problem of this show. It's the same as them worrying about explaining how Iris found Mike last week. Milo. How Iris found Milo last week. She just pops up. I'm like, how the fuck did she find him? Like, that's important to me. Like, don't just glaze over that kind of shit because you don't care and you just want to get Iris back to Milo. Like, don't skip over these important steps. Like, those things matter to me. And if you want to be, and I don't know, I sound preachy here, like I'm a know-it-all, but I feel like if you want to be considered one of those elite shows, when a year ends and people go, what are the best shows you watched this year? You're not gonna be able to fuck with shows like Andor or Better Call Saul or Succession or Reservation Dogs. You're not gonna be able to fuck with shows like that when they care about these minor details because they're filling in a puzzle or a picture. They make a picture more robust or vivid. When you fill in these details, it's more full, it's more complete. When you glaze over that shit or you skip over that shit, is it that important that I know how Tatiana and Mike ended up in that location? No, I guess not. I was able to create a scenario that would get them there that is plausible. So, like, no, it's not a huge deal, but it's the kind of shit that this show isn't concerned with, that a show like Andor is concerned with, and that's why I think a show like this can never be like a prestige kind of, like, be spoken in the same breath as shows like Succession and shows like Andor or whatever the case may be, because it doesn't have that attention to detail that those shows have. So that's just a point that I wanted to make about this show and why I consider this show to be like A+ popcorn TV, but not A+ prestige TV. It's like B level prestige TV. When I say B level, I don't mean like a B movie. I mean like letter grades, like A through F. It's like a B. So like that's a good score, but it's like on the prestige rating scale, it's a B. On the popcorn TV scale, it's an A+. So I just wanted to get that out there because I felt like after this, I was like, this is like the third example of this where I can now kind of say like, okay, this show's really good, but it's never going to be like that upper echelon level of show because it clearly is not as concerned with minor details. And they're called minor details for a reason. They're minor and they don't hinder the show. That's why it's an A+ popcorn show. But they're minor issues that better shows wouldn't have. So that's all I want to say about that. And then lastly, I want to close with talking about my what I hope will be a new segment of the week. I want to call it the Funny Bunny moment of the week. And I like Funny Bunny because obviously it rhymes. And then, I don't know, I feel like there's 3 consecutive weeks now where there's been something that happened with Bunny that I thought was funny. And I'm like, well, maybe I should just have a Funny Bunny moment now. So episode 1's Funny Bunny moment was when he was perched on top of the Metro PCS like Batman on the phone. Like, that was an incredible shot. Like, if you look at my Facebook page when I'm like live commenting while I'm watching something, go back to, I mean, you'd have to scroll pretty far, but you'd have to scroll down to when I was watching episode 1 of this season and I posted the picture of it. Like, what the fuck is this? Who shot this shit? But that was my Funny Bunny moment of week 1. Episode 1. Episode 2 was when they were starting Mike's plan of arresting all the gang leaders, and the one gang leader came up and but he was just standing there growling at him. Like, what the fuck is this? And then the Funny Bunny moment of this week was just when the cop was calling him in the yard and he's like, Buddy Washington. Oh, like, wait, what? He has a last name? Like, how you like, you can't have like nickname last name. Like, it's either like you call the person by their nickname or you call them by their government name. So if his name is like Gerald Washington, you got to be like, Hey, Gerald Washington, or something like that, or Gerald, or whatever. You can't say Bunny Washington. I'm like, what part of the game is that Bunny Washington? I'm like, you got a last name now? So yeah, Bunny Washington is my funny bunny moment of week 3. So that's all I got for this week. I will see you guys next week for episode 4, and until then, peace.